Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I'm Nicole Forbes, Education and Events Director for Genesis 70s, and we are here today to talk about vines. All About Vines is really kind of a wide topic to cover, and I usually like to, kind of riff off of the plants that I have here on site to show you, and so we'll be focusing a lot on things that I can actually show and tell today, but I do want to talk about vines in general as use in landscape and just kind of their differences so that when you're looking to select a vine, you have those various considerations in mind. Vines are, when I think about vines in my garden, I use vines in a lot of different ways to create elevation or height. So a vertical accent in the garden is easily achieved by vines, as simple as placing a tower, like this metal structure here, into the middle of a perennial bed or garden bed and allowing a vine such as a clematis to climb up the structure. This is one of my favorite clematis, and we'll get into them in a little bit, but this is Polish Spirit. I'm not Polish, so it has nothing to do with my ethnicity, but I do just adore this flower, not only for its ease of care, but it blooms literally from June through September and just covers itself with flowers. So having a vine such as a clematis that blooms for a long time, giving you a vertical accent and extended bloom time in a perennial bed or even in a shrub border is fantastic. And if you don't want to use a tower such as this, in many cases you can partner a vine, and especially clematis are great partners for this, to grow up a small tree or even a shrub such as a rhododendron or even like a rose of Sharon or another shrub, using the shrub or tree as the trellis or structure that it climbs up, giving you again an extended bloom time and repurposing that plant in your garden as a structure for another plant. Often vines come in just as clutch for privacy screening and creating those barriers, whether it's artificial kind of dividers between different spaces within your garden to help create kind of sitting areas or screening from garbage cans or air conditioning vents, those kinds of things. Or they're a great solution or alternative to the highly overused arborvitae, which we all use as a tall, narrow privacy screen or hedge to give us an instant barrier. Although vines don't often create such an instant barrier, their purpose though is really just nothing but vertical, which means that as opposed to a wider or larger growing privacy screen shrub or hedge, it doesn't take up the width into your garden, so you don't have to sacrifice so much space to it, although vines can achieve quite similar, if not even greater, vertical heights as most of our hedge material or screens. The annual vines that we will talk about towards the end of the class are similar to other annuals that we use in our garden. Long season of bloom time, ease of care, and rapid growth, which also just give us all of those deliveries that our annuals give us, only with extra height or ability to kind of cover bigger spaces. So privacy, height, and then even just kind of whimsy, so to speak. So I have one space in my garden that is almost a cave. It's an enclosure that is completely surrounded in vines, and I can go in there on a hot day and be in the shade. I can go in there when I don't want anybody to find me and be pretty much secluded and private. I can well, there's some spiders that fall on me when I'm in there, so that's always fun. But I can, rest and relax in there, even in a rainstorm, and only have a few drops that come all the way through. So creating a room itself out of vines is even a way to, just find another shelter or another space, another way to garden or create space in your garden. Now, there are a lot of different structures that vines can climb, and that includes the most, rigged up and basic homespun inventions from, screw eyes and wire, or even kind of heavy coated clothesline type material that gives vines something structurally to support them on, wooden trellises, bamboo teepees, you name it. There's a lot of different ways for a vine to climb, but it's important to consider the method that the vine uses to climb when choosing your trellis or support structure, or vice versa, considering what structure you have as a factor in choosing your vine. And what I mean by that is, if we are using a space such as a flat wall or a brick chimney to have a vine climb up, then we need a vine that climbs with kind of feet or attachments to the vine itself, rather than one that climbs with a wrapping or serpentine motion, because there won't be any structure to wrap around, rather than we'll have that brick structure that the vine itself needs to cling to. So there are 3 basic styles that vines use to climb, and the 3 styles would be the clinging. So clinging vines, lots of us are familiar with English ivy, as it clings onto our trees and climbs them up to the lowest branches or even beyond. Ivy, trumpet vine, climbing hydrangea. There are a range of vines that use foot type attachments to cling onto a surface rather than twine and wrap around. And so these vines are better on wood, brick, cement structures, to get something with a little bit of a grain to them so that their little feet can get attached. They are not great for a metal rod type trellis or a grid style trellis, because they won't have enough surface area for their feet to really grab onto. The most common, I'd say, form of vine that we're familiar with is the twining vines, or the type that wrap serpentine style around their structure. It is, from a botanical perspective, it's really fascinating to see how and to understand how a vine actually does wrap. The plant is able to sense the structure, both the location and the presence of the structure, and I believe it's due to the availability of sunlight. I'm not sure how the plant knows the structure's there, but then what happens is, actually on the side where the structure exists, the cells on that stem on that side slow their growth, and the cells on the opposite side of where the structure is located grow faster, which causes the stem itself to actually curve and curl around the structure itself. So I love to know how things work. So I think, a little glimpse into the workings of the inside of a plant is just like revealing some mystery that you didn't know you needed to know. So now you know. The most common climbing or serpentine examples would be things like honeysuckle, jasmine, morning glory. These are the vines that we see, quickly wrap around and gain height, but they need something to wrap around. So again, a wall, a brick chimney is not going to provide enough surface area for that vine to serpentine around, so it's not going to be able to climb. Likewise, the wider the structure, just physics here, the wider the structure, if you've got a giant column and you want a vine to go around it, it's going to take that vine a long time to gain height, because it has to spend so much energy making it around that circumference. So the smaller the diameter of the structure, the quicker the vine can achieve a vertical height, and in most cases that's what we want it to do. So consider again small gauge wires or thinner material. Really, even a 4x4 can take a long time for a serpentine vine to climb up. So providing a thinner structure, like a wire that's vertically attached to that 4x4, will allow that vine to have a little bit better clinging and achieve that height faster. The third style of vine climbing is vines that climb with tendrils. Now, again, I show my age, but I show my age. So tendrils are like phone cords, right? Old style telephone cords, a curly-Q style tendril. Most of us are familiar with garden peas or sweet peas, which are probably one of the best known as far as something that attaches with the tendril. But I have some of the most beautiful tendrils displayed right here on a passion vine. So I'm going to pull down on this tendril to just see how curled it is. Now all of this tendril needs to do is attach itself to something, and then as it continues to tighten, it pulls the vine closer to its support and gives it just a little bit more structure and support to hang on to. So we see a brand new set of tendrils that are forming here, and so easily just hook right around my finger. So vines that climb with tendrils, again, need a more narrow gauge to get their little tendrils to hang on to. Now, of course, they can go up to like an inch in diameter, but the bigger the diameter of support, the harder they have in actually grabbing on. More likely to like grab onto themselves or a neighbor that's a thinner diameter, you know, a branch or something that's hanging nearby that's easier to grab. So giving them the right support is critical. And similar to tendrils, and still what we would consider a tendril climber, is a slightly adapted tendril from a clematis. And this is not as easy to see on this plant, but maybe on the evergreens. The clematis attaches with a modified tendril that is formed by the stem that attaches the leaf to the main stem. So the leaf itself is attached to the main stem, and it has this section here, and that is actually the section that curls around to hang on to something. So it's a pretty thin, that's a narrow space, which means that clematis do need something relatively small gauged or narrow to get their little arms around to help them attach. Now most trees and shrubs will be adequate for a clematis to grab onto. They are able to grow serpentine style somewhat, but then really hold themselves up and kind of anchor with those tendrils so that they don't pull themselves back down with just the weight of foliage and flowers. Other examples, well, peas, sweet peas, passion vine, and clematis are good examples of tendril climbers. By the way, the handout is attached to the blog, to this video as a blog article as well, so you can follow along or just read afterwards. The getting a vine started, you know, taking it home and putting it onto your own trellis is always something that we're asked about. You know, should I tie it up? Do I take it off of the original supports? Yes and yes. So it's, you know, if we take a vine home such as this beautiful honeysuckle today, we can see for starters that it began its little life with a small bamboo teepee that gave it support, and as it's grown, now it's kind of, you know, erupted out the top with a volcano of growth, and even some pieces off of the sides that haven't been, you know, grabbed and attached into the support. So when we take this honeysuckle home, after it's been planted, leave it on its support until it gets planted. Otherwise, you've got a more difficult job on your hand as a lot of it kind of flops around. But leave it all together until it's planted, and after it's planted, in most cases, it's going to have either wire or tape or kind of a plastic tie or rubber bands that secure it to the support. So go ahead and snap those off, cut them off, remove them. And then you can gently pull the bamboo teepee away from the structure itself, or undo it completely and just take each individual pole apart and out of the ground. At that point, you will have a lot of foliage that needs support and has lost its main support. So at this point, you want to be tying these up onto your trellis or support just for guidance and as the very beginning of getting the vine started. Now, of course, that's going to give us instantly a lot more height than we already had, and the vine continues to grow from the ends, which means that that's giving you some really instant vertical height and growth right away as the vine continues to fill in from below. So over the seasons, this honeysuckle will first gain height, but still give us visually a lot of gaps that we can look through. But then season after season, it's going to fill in that space in between and become a lot more of a visual screen, as well as height in the garden. So things that we use to tie up vines, ideally we want to avoid anything with wire. So anything that's got like, any harsh wire. So anything like a bread tie that's going to eventually cut into the little vine stem as it grows. So we want something that's got a little bit of flex and give to it. Or as you attach it, make sure that you've attached it with enough space that it can support the vine but not potentially cut into the stem as it increases in size or in girth. We use a couple of different things here at the garden center. One of them we use so much that unfortunately I'm out of it right now, and that is a Velcro item, actually made by Velcro. It's a thin strip of Velcro that can be cut to whatever size you want, and then the Velcro is just used again to wrap around your structure and back to attach to itself, which gives you the support that you need, but the ability to retie further up the vine as your vine continues to grow, which can be really helpful, although not always necessary, because once you've got the vine tied up to the structure and given it appropriate sized structure and the support to get started, it will get attached and remain attached all on its own. So really you don't need to keep feeding it through or anything like that. Typically most vines just keep growing. This here is vinyl stretch tie, and vinyl stretch tie is what you'll see used in most cases on plants from the garden center or from nursery growers. At the nurseries, this is cut to length, and then a little staple is used to kind of attach it. Here, we don't have the stapler at the garden centers. We just tie this vinyl stretch tie, a little knot around the bamboo stake or whatever makes a perfect support. But again, you can use almost anything you need. I like at home to use old nylons, although I'm running out and nobody wears nylons anymore. Hallelujah. So eventually I'll have to figure out something else. But another option for a little bit heavier duty, even though it says light duty here, this is a vinyl coated wire. So as I was mentioning before, something like clothesline or clothesline wire, if you grew up airing your clothes out to dry in the backyard, we had permanent clotheslines that had this very similar coating to them. And this is enough that, again, it's not going to cut into the vine as you wrap it around. Really easy and nice to use for support. This can easily be actually created as a structure itself, as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, with like screw eyes into fence boards or something like that, and then creating some sort of mesh or network with this heavy coated wire, and eventually your vine would grow up and hide it completely. So that's how vines grow. That's a little bit about structure and supports. Now, a lot of times we're given either a gift or we see a cute little trellis or fan-shaped wire structure that's decorative. You know, a lot of times it has like a little bird on it or something cute. And often these little things are like 2 feet tall, maybe 3 feet tall, and you know, they look like they would just go into a container or a pot. It's really not common that we find a vine that is smaller than 8, 10, 12 feet or even more. So honeysuckle, for example, let's just see what the tag says out of curiosity. Well, 6 to 10 feet tall with support on this. I think that's a big fat lie. It's already 6 feet tall. So this is just a baby. This honeysuckle, I'm guessing, would easily go 15 to 20 feet. This clematis here, the evergreen clematis variety, 20 to 25 feet long. We have vines that'll go 40 to 60 feet, vertical and horizontal growth kind of combined. So it's really not super common that you find a 3-foot vine that stops at 3 foot to cover that cute little decorative trellis. There are a few clematis that stay short. There are a few shorter annual vines like the knee-high varieties of sweet peas, but in most cases vines are large. Vines need a lot of support structure to cover, and then they will use all that space and sometimes more. It's also, as you are planting vines, a couple of extra things to consider. If you have an arch or an arbor, whether it's a rounded structure or a squared structure, maybe a path goes in between it, or you've got, you know, a sculpture or a fountain in the center. If you want to grow a vine up either side of the arch or to cover the arch, you'll need to plant a vine on both sides. So we don't expect one vine planted on one side to grow up, over, and back down an archway, since plants all grow up towards where the sun is. So planting a vine on either side is going to give you that coverage on both sides. But which direction that arbor is facing is also important to consider, because if the arbor is oriented so that the sides are facing east and west, for example, or north and south, as the sun moves throughout the day, one side of the arbor will actually shade the other side of the arbor. So as the sun side or dominant side fills in, it may cast a shadow on the afternoon sun side, so that one vine grows a little bit bigger and thrives at the expense potentially of the other. Likewise, because vines do grow towards the direction of the prevailing sun or the dominant sun direction, if you are planting a vine to span a fence line, for example, it is best to plant it so that it grows toward that dominant or prevalent sun direction, which means that you would plant the vine, for example, on the east side of a fence post panel, expecting that the majority of the vine's growth will be traveling in a westerly direction. And I hope that makes sense, but if you've witnessed this kind of thing in your own garden, planning a vine to go a direction that it is not interested in going is folly again, and you quickly realize that you can't control it. So going into it and understanding just that it makes a difference where you plant it can make a world of difference in how well your planting does. So once we've figured all of that out, what kind of structure, how do we tie it up, how do we plant it, how big is it going to get, and what different style of growth we want, we can now really get into vine selection. And the biggest question that we get probably across the board is not, what grows in sun, what grows in shade, but which vines are evergreen. And that's a legit question. Because we want to, if we're using it for screening, if we're using it as a privacy hedge or a barrier, chances are that we wanted it to be a screen year-round, so we want to know which vines are going to be there year-round. So there are evergreen vines, but they are relatively limited. So for here in the Portland metro area, our two evergreen vines are jasmine and the evergreen clematis. So the two together both happen to be fragrant vines as well. So the flowers of the jasmine, which are in bloom right now, are one of my absolute favorite smells. I have jasmine covering my back patio, which gives us shade and fragrance that comes into the house the whole time that it's blooming, and it's just delightful. The evergreen clematis blooms in mid to late February and sometimes even into early March, so it is really like a late winter, early spring bloomer. Also highly fragrant, but not always blooming at a time that our windows are open or that we're out sitting outside to enjoy it. So one of those that people may or may not realize has such a nice aroma, because often you just see it as you're walking past or driving by, and not many other things are in bloom at that time of year, so it catches your eye. Both flowers tend to be white, although the evergreen clematis has a variety called apple blossom, where the flowers start out dusky pink, and by the time they open, they're a pale pink, almost white color. Both plants are fast growers, although the evergreen clematis is a faster grower. They are both tolerant of a fair amount of shade, but again, the more shade, the less flowers we'll get. So we'll get some nice green growth, but fewer blooms as we get less sun. The new growth on the evergreen clematis is kind of a coppery bronze color, which is really attractive until it starts to get a little bit thicker and leathery, and then it turns a nice deep shade of green. Pretty long leaves, and again, we can see a vine that easily goes 20 or more feet, 20-25 feet, both, well, that would be either vertically or horizontally, or a combination of. The evergreen clematis is not great for the hottest afternoon sun or reflectively heat areas. So it's not what I would consider a drought tolerant vine, although it does need good drainage like most clematis do. I like to put it in either morning sun and afternoon shade, areas of dappled sunlight, or even just a little bit filtered sun to partial shade. So it can sunburn, and especially if it's growing against something that's giving it reflective heat, radiating heat, which is often the case. So consider again, if that afternoon sun is the backdrop or reflecting heat, maybe not the best choice for the evergreen clematis. In which case, you might go with the jasmine. This is the star jasmine or Confederate jasmine. This is Trichliospermum jasminoides. It is right at the border of kind of hardiness for our zone. There have been a few hard winters that, if our jasmine planting is in its first year and not totally well established in the ground, they have been damaged and even potentially killed in one of our more extreme cold winters. And jasmine out of the ground in containers or pots or planters, raised beds, all of those are just a little bit more vulnerable to freezing and extreme winter temperatures than those that are planted in the ground. So things to consider if your jasmine's on a year one and we do get a real extreme winter, providing with extra protection, mulch around the roots, covering on the tops to protect the foliage, just at least through the extreme winter temperatures, will help preserve foliage and potentially make the difference between getting your jasmine established. My jasmine's been in the ground for like 15 years, and winter comes and goes, and I never blink an eye. So once it's really been in the ground and established, you don't need to keep worrying about it all summer long. The Portland area jasmine's just come into bloom in the last couple of weeks, and it will continue to flower at least through August, if not well into September. And again, one of those easy care plants, can be trimmed back if it grows too large for you, and it can also be grown as just a ground cover. So if it doesn't have support or structure, jasmine can kind of sprawl along the ground and be a nice ground cover as well that can be kind of trimmed to control. So star jasmine, again, we have a decent selection of it in multiple sizes right now, but every garden should have one, and the same with evergreen clematis. Those are really our two evergreen vines. Other than that, there are some vines that we would describe as semi-evergreen. I forgot one. There is an evergreen climbing hydrangea. It's not super common, so it's not something that everybody has on hand all the time, but this is evergreen climbing hydrangea. The climbing hydrangea and evergreen climbing hydrangea both climb with the feet attachments. So this needs to go straight up a wall or a fence rather than twining up a metal structure or whatever, and is for shade. So we'll talk about this in another minute when we talk about shade vines, but that one is another evergreen, not nearly as common as the first two that I talked about. Now, semi-evergreen is that kind of category. Semi-evergreen vines will drop their leaves according to the severity of winter. In a really harsh winter, they're out for the duration of the extreme temperatures and then begin to leaf back as the weather improves. Semi-evergreen vines include honeysuckle. In most cases, most honeysuckle are semi-evergreen. Also, akebia is semi-evergreen, and some passion vines would also be considered a semi-evergreen vine. So in a mild winter, you keep all the leaves. In a harsh winter, it drops its leaves, and in varying degrees from there. The best vines for shade, as I mentioned, the evergreen clematis is great for shade. There are also a list of clematis that do well in like dappled or open shade, and again, you'll have those on your handout. Beyond that, there are also so akebia, which I don't have to show today, an earlier season bloomer, pretty fast grower. I have akebia that has escaped my cave that I was talking about before. It has gone up into overhead trees and is easily 20-25 feet in the air, but the trees are my neighbor's trees and they don't do really well, so the akebia is probably the healthiest part of these trees, and just gives it a whole new element when it blooms, especially. Other great vines for shade include, as I mentioned, the climbing hydrangea. So climbing hydrangea I talked about a little bit in last week's class about hydrangeas. But here are two really great examples of the climbing hydrangea. This is the standard climbing hydrangea, Hydrangea animala petiolaris. The petiolaris or climbing hydrangea is a deciduous vine. It can scale 40 feet or more, and here at the Lake Oswego Dennis 70s, we have it climbing up the north side of our building, literally going from floor to ceiling, covering the back of our warehouse. It is mostly foliage in the darkest corners, but flowers pretty well as it comes around the edges of the building and gets just a little bit more sunlight. So it's a pretty dark sliver that it grows in there, but it provides at least a green cover to a drab gray building, cement building side for the neighbors who live behind us. When the climbing hydrangea drops its leaves in the winter, it shows off kind of a coppery brown stem structure that also has some peeling wood to the older stems, so it gives us some winter interest. If you're into peeling stems and things like that, it's a little bit of interest to look at beyond just a deciduous plant. And its flower, it's just kind of at the tail end of its flower, but it's a large white lace cap style flower structure that also is visited by bees and butterflies as well. So it's a beautiful flower structure. And then, as I just showed off a little bit earlier, there is an evergreen climbing hydrangea as well. This is much more of a shy bloomer, so doesn't tend to flower quite as well as the deciduous climbing hydrangea does, and attaches with little sucker feet, so it needs to go straight up a wall like Spider-Man or a fly, but other than that, keeps its leaves year round and grows well in shade. The well-known vines for sun include, again, as I mentioned, the jasmine, the honeysuckles that we looked at, and first I was showing the major Wheeler honeysuckle, but we also have gold flame here. And gold flame still has some flowers. So we see this is a beautiful kind of pink bud that opens up into a creamy blossom that eventually turns kind of a buttery yellow inside. Now, gold flame, excuse me, gold flame is showing some signs of powdery mildew right now, so I wanted to show this plant because most plants have kind of if they're going to have a problem, they have a relatively predictable problem. And the more we garden, the more we kind of start knowing which issues are associated with which plants. So a lot of us that grow roses know that there's some, fungal diseases that affect roses, and we have to keep a watch on that. Honeysuckle has a few issues, but it's such a robust grower that it's very rarely harmed by these issues. But this is one that can defoliate a honeysuckle, so cause a lot of the leaves to fall off. And this is a fungal disease that is prevalent at this time of year. So we have kind of a humid, muggy temperatures and sort of mild weather conditions right now before we're really heating up to summer. And the example that you can see looks sort of like flour or powder has been dusted onto the leaf. And the leaf is also kind of waffled or rippled in its texture. So it's contorted when it should normally be a pretty, well, this one's a little bit waffled too, but it should normally be a pretty flat, pretty smooth shape. We've got a lot of ripples and waffles on this one, plus all of the discoloration. So powdery mildew is spread by fungal spores. This would be something that we would spray for disease control. So you can either use neem oil or any other kind of basic fungicide for gardens, and kind of take care of basic issues like this. But again, best to know them and recognize them in the first place so that you know what to do. And then of course, if you never suckled a honeysuckle, here we have a honeysuckle flower, and I've shown how to do this before, but there's a little bit that you pull off the back of the flower and a tiny structure that begins to come out as you pull, and you can see that that same structure is coming out of the center of the flower as I pull on it. So here I pull it back, and as a little kind of knob on the flower comes out, it pulls a little bit of nectar or sap. So you can actually see the nectar. Oh, and before it came out, I should have suckled it, but it's still attached. And a little bit in the back of the flower that comes out. It's just a sweet, juicy nectar that fuels hummingbirds and those of us that wish to be hummingbirds. And if you've never suckled a honeysuckle, start living today by doing it now. Other than that, more sunvines, trumpet creeper, speaking of hummingbirds, is a very popular vine for hummingbirds. Now, trumpet creeper is a late summer bloomer, so it's not even yet budded, not to mention blooming. Trumpet creeper is another Spider-Man climber. So this guy goes straight up a wall, great on a chimney, brick wall, cinder block, structure or whatever it can hide and cover. It's not going to wrap around things as well. It wants to climb. It is also known to be somewhat aggressive or borderline invasive. So plant it like you mean it, and don't expect to get rid of it once it's in the ground. It is there pretty much for good and can run and spread a bit too. So just words of caution. It is also best in the absolute hottest, almost unbearable location in your garden. So somewhere maybe near a crepe myrtle that also wants that kind of intense heat is where a trumpet creeper would go. It can take that reflective heat that comes off of a building or a chimney or something like that. And the flowers are tubular. They are 2 to 3 inches in size and usually hot colors. So bright orange, bright red, golden yellow. Here I have Balboa sunset, and you can see this is almost all of those colors, red, orange, and yellow. Now we're looking at a plant that can get fairly large, so 30 feet or more. It does drop its leaves in the winter, but you knew that already because I only told you there's really just a few evergreen vines. Trumpet creeper not only is beloved by hummingbirds, but butterflies will come and visit it as well. And this vine means business. So again, plant it like you mean it. The list for sun vines just goes on and on and on. We're talking all types of clematis, although most of you, if you've ever thought about planting clematis or growing clematis, you know, they like their feet in the shade, but their tops in the sun. So that just means giving them a little bit of ground cover, or even a mulch, or you know, small bush friend to shade the roots of the clematis, so that then the tops can grow up into a nice, you know, sunny spot. And beyond all of the vines for sun, which again are on your handout, I also want to talk about a couple of annual vines. Annual vines are fantastic in a sense that they flower and flower and flower. They give you volume in the garden. So I mean, a lot of annuals, you know, are so big or fit in a 14-inch hanging basket, a bunch of them. So this annual, you know, gives you a lot of growth, and seems like you can almost watch them grow sometimes. And some of my favorites I have today, and this is particularly one of my favorites, and it's called Black-Eyed Susan vine. It's a very common and popular annual vine. You can see, well, you can see best on maybe this one. You can see that this is a twining grower. So it's twined around this little hoop that it has. This hoop is not adequate, guys. This is just a little starter support. So it's harder to take it off of a hoop like this, but not impossible. I would just plant this and let it continue up whatever structure it has, leaving it on its original hoop. It's just an annual, so eventually it'll cover that hoop, and when the whole thing dies in frost, you can just pull it all out of the ground. Don't struggle with that support. It's growing super fast, so it's already, you know, expanding off of its support, looking for something else to grow, wrapping around itself, and covered with flower buds. This is kind of the original color of the Black-Eyed Susan vine, but it comes now in a variety of different shades. So here we have a variety called Arizona Glow. You'll commonly see pink ones, white ones, purple ones, plus the brighter yellow, gold, and then this kind of orangey color. We are looking at easily 5 feet tall. I've seen them get to almost 10 feet tall. Bloom till frost. And if they're in full sun, their only occasional issue is towards the end of the season, they can come down with spider mites. So just watch for that. You'll kind of notice that this nice green leaf starts to take sort of a dull, kind of a matte appearance and start to look a little off green. If you look on the back side of the leaf at that point, or close up on the leaves, you may see a really, really fine silky webbing that covers the leaf itself, and a lot of teeny tiny bugs that are on the back side of the leaf. They are like the size of a period in fine print. So this isn't like, I see a spider, don't blame the spiders. Spider mites are actually a mite, even though spider's in their name. Spiders, legitimate spiders, are good in your garden, and real spiders can actually eat spider mites, so you want to encourage them to hang around. But the Black-Eyed Susan vines, again, you can grow them from after our average last frost, so mid-April, all the way through till our first frost in, you know, early November. They can be grown from seed, as many of our annuals can be grown from seed. And another one that I've actually got seed for today is Morning Glory. So I know everybody's like, what? No, this is an annual Morning Glory, not the bindweed invasive Morning Glory that we, you know, fret and fear in our gardens. This is a variety called Flying Saucer, but the flowers on these Morning Glory are larger and more ornamental than the weed Morning Glory as well. And they just bloom for a single season, and then you can save the seed, and sometimes the seed will drop and resprout, but they're not perennial in the ground, becoming a big invasive problem or issue in the long run. And another annual is Mandevilla. Mandevillas can be vines, or sometimes they can be non-vining varieties. The height on this is kind of not a huge concern. I mean, let's consider it could get up to 4 to 6 feet in a single season, but we won't see the Mandevilla achieve 12, 15 feet or so, simply because it's it's going to die after a single season of growing here in the Portland metro area. 30 to 50 degrees is its comfort zone, and we definitely dip a little bit lower than that. So another one that hummingbirds love, grows in full sun, will also tolerate partial sun at least 4 hours. It is going to bloom all season long and really gives you that great kind of tropical feel that sometimes is just what you need in the garden. So mandevillas, they have another kind of tropical counterpart, the bougainvilleas, which also are viney. Don't have any of those on hand at the moment, but last one I want to mention is hops. And I do have one scrappy little hops to look at right now. This guy, hops never looks great in a container, but hops looks great in the ground. So this is golden hops, which is why it looks so yellow. Golden hops is beautiful in that kind of limey green foliage that it has as it climbs up whatever structure you want. The lime or golden hops can grow in full sun or even partial sun. Extremely fast grower to at least 20 feet, and it does that all in a single season. So every year that hops grows, it grows everything that it's going to do in a single season from out of the ground. So at the end of summer or fall, after the hops have created their little fruits and the leaves fall off, you could actually cut hops to the ground so that you don't look at bare sticks on your trellis or on your structure through the winter. And in the spring, all of the new season's worth of growth returns, but straight out of the ground for the hops. So we can see on this plant, for example, all of the brown was part of last year's hops that was not cut back. And if we had cut that back, we'd be looking at a lot more just fresh growth instead of a combination of both last year's growth and this year's growth. My hops gives me all the shade on my patio in the summer, some privacy from my neighbors' windows that are right where I like to kind of sit in the evening and, relax from my day. And I also, though, want the winter sun in that same space. So I'm happy that it's not an evergreen plant so that it can provide me with light when I need it, but shade when I want it. So again, these are all the things that are great to consider. Fragrance, evergreen, whether it's bee attractant, drought tolerance, the shape and size of your structure, how tall it gets, and if specifically there are questions relating to clematis and clematis growing, we could do an entire class just on clematis. If you are local and if you're anywhere near the Lake Oswego area, I highly encourage you to check out the Rogerson Clematis collection that is located here at Lusher Farms in Lake Oswego. It is a nationally accredited collection, a botanical collection of clematis. They have hundreds and hundreds of varieties planted on site, and a lot of them are using neighboring plants as structures to climb, so trees and shrubs, not all trellises everywhere. So you can see kind of that partnership of structure plant with clematis and which ones are good pairings for each other. Go to their website, frcc.org, I think something like that, Friends of Rogerson Clematis or Rogerson Clematis Collection, just to make sure with all that's going on that they have open visitor hours, but normally it's just a great place to stroll. Otherwise, check the handout. I will answer comments if there are any questions or comments, and thanks as always for tuning in. Happy gardening.